Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another episode of Ask an OpenShift Admin. I am Chris Short, host with the most, producer and showrunner for the Red Hat live streaming channels. I am happy to be joined by the one and only Andrew Sullivan and special guest Moran Goldblum today. So, Andrew, we're talking about the assisted installer. Indeed. I'm excited. I am excited, but you have some things that you want to address first, which I feel like today it's very important.
Yeah. So no, I'm happy to be here as well. Happy to be on the stream again. I feel like June was a little rough, June and early July, because of holidays and PTO
Vacation,
and all kinds of other stuff. So it's
all kinds of stuff.
It's good to be back in the stream of things, or so to speak. So yes, hello everyone. Welcome to the Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hour. So this is a part of the Office Hour series of live streams here on OpenShift.tv, which means that we are here to answer your questions. Whatever they happen to be, whatever is top of mind, whatever you want to ask, you're more than welcome at any point in time to ask those questions. Whatever platform you're watching us on, they get rebroadcast across all of them. So we'll address those questions as they come up. We also have a topic each day where we find something that is interesting or something that we hope is interesting to you all and relevant to OpenShift and OpenShift administrators to talk about. And today, that is the assisted installer, which is the least kept secret of a most amazing feature that is coming in OpenShift.
It's cool. It's very cool.
Yeah. And I say it's a terribly kept secret because we actually covered the OpenShift installer about a year ago, way back in episode 3. But there's been a lot of changes and a lot of things that are happening with the assisted installer. So before I get to the top of mind topics today, I wanted to introduce our guest, who is Moan. I'm terrible at names. As many people have heard me say, just ask my children. I confuse their names all the time. So my apologies. But Moan, please introduce yourself.
So hi everyone, my name is Moran Goldblum. I'm a product manager for Red Hat OpenShift, dealing a lot with the installation experience, specifically with assisted installer, as well as with the edge type of deployment use cases. So you will be hearing about single node OpenShift, which is a solution we are issuing as a dev preview with our coming 4.8 release. So I'm leading that one, as well as kind of a multi-cluster type of deployment options integrated with Red Hat Advanced Cluster Management as well. Perhaps we're going to talk a bit about that one as well. So that's me. Thanks, Andrew, for introducing.
Yeah, and there was nothing there I didn't love. ACM, assisted installations, single node OpenShift. I'm so excited for all of those things, and particularly, we've had Catherine on before, to talk about the installation and the installer process. We've had Tushar on, and I bring up Tushar specifically because we talked a little bit about ACM and about how we're seeing customers with this trend towards more smaller clusters. And I think tools like the assisted installer and integration with ACM just make all of that much better. So it's all of this is really exciting to me. It's one of those, I joined Red Hat just before OpenShift 4 was released. So it's like watching a child grow up and, go from crawl to walk to run, basically. So as I mentioned, and as most of you know who have watched the stream before, I do tend to have a list of topics that what I call the top of mind things. And we spend the first few minutes of each show talking about these topics, and they are things that I feel are relevant to you all, to our audience, and things that I hope are beneficial and useful for you to know. And let me switch some tabs around here and let me share my screen. We use so many video conferencing things these days that I can't hardly keep them all. You should be used to this. I know. The issue is particularly with Zoom, because it makes all of the windows small, and we all have like 400 windows open. I have to figure out which Google Chrome window is the right one to share.
Yeah, I wish they would take up the whole screen with that UI for screen sharing.
Yeah, so you should be seeing a vCenter window at the moment.
Yes, we do.
All right. So the first thing that I want to bring up is Tomorrow is the What's New presentation.
That's right.
So here on OpenShift.tv, I think it's a little bit before this time. Is it 9 a.m.?
It is at 10 a.m. tomorrow.
10 a.m. So 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow here on OpenShift.tv. The product management team will be delivering the What's Next, which is the roadmap presentation for OpenShift. So I will be here. Chris will be here. I'm sure we'll have a couple of others to answer any questions that you may have. So anything that, if you don't understand what a particular thing means, if you want to ask if something is coming, if you want to ask why something isn't coming, we're more than happy to answer those questions if we can, or communicate those directly over to the product management team so we can get those answered. So those are always popular. They're a great way to find out what's happening in OpenShift in the next 6 to 9 months. So the next thing, as Chris alluded to, is, and actually the next two things are related to CVEs.
Yes.
So this was a big one. You can see it came out yesterday, July 20th. So effectively, and I haven't dug too much into this, but essentially this is a vulnerability that is in systemd.
It is.
Where, and you can see here, a local attacker can crash systemd and the entire system.
Yeah.
Big
deal. Big deal.
As we scroll down through here, you can see it affects Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. Both of these affect Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. Remember, RHEL 8 is the basis for CoreOS, which is used by OpenShift, which means that if we scroll down here far enough, we'll eventually find affected products. And that will include, eventually, it should include Red Hat OpenShift in here somewhere. Anyways, be aware of this. Pay attention to the mitigation factors that are inside of here. You can see the diagnose and all of the other things. Like all CVEs, like all security OS patching things, these are addressed through OpenShift updates. So effectively, when you upgrade OpenShift, it will also update CoreOS inside of there. So it uses RPM OS tree, where we've talked about this back in what was the episode we did with Mark? We did an episode around CoreOS with Mark Russell. So I'll dig up the link and see if we can post that one in there in case you're curious. But yeah, please pay attention to the CVEs. Be sure to protect your system against these types of things. And you can see all of the details inside of this particular.
Yeah, so if you have systemd in one of your containers, patch it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. It is possible to stuff systemd into a container and use that.
I think we have init containers with DVI images. So
that'll be important as well to update your container images that happen to
if you happen to have systemd in there. Yeah. Or if those containers are running on a box with systemd, which is incredibly likely.
Since what, RHEL 6?
Yeah.
When did we move to systemd? RHEL 6 or RHEL 7? I think it was RHEL 7.
7, yeah.
So first CVE addressed. So the second one, the second one, which came up, so you can see again, this was published, get out of here menu, yesterday around Helm. And this one is not necessarily new. Red Hat actually published it as a CVE back a month ago around a vulnerability with publishing, and if you haven't already, Chris,
I dropped the access.redhat.com link, and I'll drop the article next.
Okay, the new stack. Okay. Yeah. So if you haven't seen this article, it does a great job of explaining what the vulnerability is. Essentially, the Helm client sends the username and password as a part of the URL to to the Helm repo, even if it's not the repo that it's meant for. So
you can totally flub a username.
Bad on a few different levels, not the least of which being URL encoded means that it's just out there and being sent to the wrong place.
Encode, not an encrypt.
So the fix here is, and as the new stack article points out, is to update to Helm version 3.6.1 or later. Now, interestingly, if you look at this CVE, so this CVE is in the process of being updated, I expect. I know there was a little bit of back and forth internally this morning around this is only addressing ACM and the version of Helm being used by ACM. We know that Helm is used by the core OpenShift product as well. So I'm expecting some more information to come out about this, and in particular, some updates to the Helm client being used. So just to show us here, oops, if we go to the client's mirror here on mirror.openshift.com. So for reference, this is if you just go to cloud.redhat.com, which I happen to have up actually. If you go to downloads,
which is
we talked about this last week.
Yeah.
So if you hover over this, and it's going to be really hard to see on the screen, so I'll just right click and do a copy link address. And if I paste that, you can see this takes us to mirror.openshift.com/pub. And if I remove the section here specific to the OpenShift installer, we have, among other things, Helm. And you can see the latest one in here is 3.5. So I'm expecting some things to change inside of here at some point. I don't have details yet because, well, it's only 11 and 11 here on the East Coast. So I'm expecting some things to change here in the not too distant future. If something changes before Friday morning, I will include that in the blog post. So for anybody who doesn't know, we follow each one of these live streams with a blog post that summarizes everything that we talked about with links directly to where in the recording we were talking about it. So normally those go out Friday morning. This week it happened to be a little bit late.
Well, apparently the blog maintainer got stuck via air travel in some
and
unusual circumstances and such.
Here's an example from last week where we have everything that we talk about. I can pick on any one of these and it'll take us directly to that link. So it's a great resource. I definitely encourage, if you missed an episode or if there's something specific you want to look at, to refer to the blog post. But I'm certainly not going to be upset at the OpenShift.com folks. I know that they are busy because there are some other changes coming in the next week and a half or so. So don't be alarmed if your OpenShift.com/blog links suddenly change to RedHat.com links in the near future. That is planned. Should be transparent. You shouldn't notice any difference.
Right. Yeah. If you got any links bookmarked, that's all going to get handled. Yeah.
Yep. So just a heads up. So moving away from slightly depressing security things, let's talk a little bit about a question that I have seen come up a few times now. When we deploy IPI and, what happens is we rely on the machine API operator to interact with that underlying infrastructure provider. So I'll pick on VMware because that's actually what we're talking about, or what I will be talking about here. So what that means is that machine API operator talks to vCenter and says, hey, create me a virtual machine that is, it's a clone of the template in the case of IPI, that has, X CPU, X memory, Y network adapters, so on and so forth. But there is no other awareness in that machine API provider around other features and other capabilities inside of OpenShift, or inside of, in this case, vSphere. Right? It isn't aware of things like DRS clusters. It just says, clone this template. And, it does put it into a resource pool. It can put it into a cluster, but it isn't aware of all of those other things. So the question that's come up is, hey, I want to have OpenShift and the machine API operator configure things like DRS rules, anti-affinity rules for those nodes. It makes sense from a high availability perspective to configure anti-affinity rules for, at a minimum, the control plane nodes. Right? We want to be able to survive a node failing, and if all three control plane nodes are on the same hypervisor node, that's bad. So unfortunately, that's not something that's available today. So you would need to, after deployment, you would need to go in as the vSphere admin and create those DRS groups. It's pretty straightforward. So I'll go to settings here. And from here, we've got DRS. So in my cluster, it's actually broken. So this is my lab cluster. So I actually deliberately break DRS by turning off the VCLS VMs in an advanced setting, because I don't want them to use those resources, because I need those resources for other things. Anyways, you'll want to create VM/host groups the easiest thing to do is to create a group. We'll name it OWV because that's the name of the cluster control plane. And we will add some virtual machines inside of here. Oh, thank you, VMware, for not making it obvious which one of these is which. We're just going to guess. So they're VMs that are named the same, but they're in different resource pools and different folders.
Well,
which
I can tell some of these are not even on because
none of them are on.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm just going to randomly select 3 of these and hit OK. What we'll do is, so that now puts all of these VMs into the same group. And then we can create these host or VM rules. So we'll add a rule. We'll call it the VV control plane anti-affinity. And we want to select separate virtual machines here. And we will then simply select our virtual machines. Oh, you're not going to let me select a group, are you? No, that figures. So I created the group for nothing. But
sorry,
no worries. Right before you, or maybe as you joined our green room meeting, I was saying how this is the second time that I've been in an empty house with the kids like actually in school. My wife is at work. It's very strange.
That was the case until about two minutes ago. It was a very big day in the Short household. Max is officially no longer allergic to eggs, so we're very happy about that.
Nice, congratulations.
Yes.
One less thing to worry about.
Yeah, exactly. As you know, eggs are in literally everything, so we have to be careful with literally everything. And it's kind of a big day for us.
Yeah. So congratulations.
Thanks.
So just to summarize real quick, so our VM host rules, we created that anti-affinity rule. We can see down here, we have our 3 control plane nodes, and we've basically told it, hey, don't put these on the same node. I will say, I always encourage folks to use soft anti-affinity rules instead of hard anti-affinity rule. And the rationale for that is, in my case, I've only got 2 nodes, but let's say you only have 3 nodes.
Right.
And one of those goes down, right? Is it better to have 2 OpenShift control plane nodes on one host with some increased risk there, or is it better to have increased risk associated with only having 2 control plane nodes because the third one wouldn't be able to restart? I tend to favor the better to have etcd have its full set of resiliency and redundancy and risk the cluster just going offline at that point, right? Fully going offline, than to run in that more what I perceive to be a more risky scenario. The other thing that you may want to consider is increasing the priority of OpenShift and the nodes associated with it. So that way, should you have a node or several nodes in your cluster fail, you would be able to, right, as it restarts virtual machines, as vSphere restarts virtual machines, the OpenShift nodes get higher priority, both in when they get restarted as well as in resources. Now, this is going to be a very individual, right? I'm biased because, well, it's OpenShift, and of course I love OpenShift. But this is really, it's ultimately a very personal decision to your organization because OpenShift is a concentrator of apps. Right? Each one of those OpenShift virtual machines is probably going to have, many different applications, containerized applications for your organization. So it may make sense for you to then, hey, there's 10 apps in OpenShift, whereas each one of these other VMs is only one app or only one portion of an app. So just prioritize appropriately, take into account whether or not that can affect your overall recoverability strategy. And, the last thing I've got, very quick, very easy one. So if you weren't aware, with OpenShift, we now have socket-based licensing. So if you are using a bare metal, a physical node, essentially anything that does not have a hypervisor between OpenShift and the host, you can use socket-based entitlements.
Nice.
So instead of core-based entitlements. So what has come up a couple of times is, can I deploy a virtual control plane with physical worker nodes, or vice versa, right? So some mix of physical and virtual.
Yeah.
The answer to that is yes, you absolutely can. So one, from a purely implementation standpoint, you just need to make sure that you deploy with the platform agnostic non-integrated method, basically platform none. And that's because you can't mix cloud providers. You can't have some nodes that are VMware with the cloud provider integration and some nodes that are OpenStack, right? That just Kubernetes prevents you from doing that, not OpenShift, Kubernetes.
Right.
The second part of that is, yes, you can absolutely mix entitlements inside of that same cluster as well. So from a kind of logical, am I adhering to the Red Hat, entitlement rules? Yep, no issue with that whatsoever. And a lot of folks, we found probably a surprising number. That's something that they want to do to be able to optimize their workloads for the right type of host at the right time. And one of the most frequent ones is GPUs, of course. Being able to put, have a physical machine with many GPUs in it, and then putting containers on that machine to optimize utilization.
Right.
Okay, that's all I got.
Cool. Moron, you're up, buddy.
Yeah. So I wanted to, and let me find the right tab here. So I wanted to kind of kick this off with, and I wanted to ask, and I can give you an answer, but I wanted to hear your answer, hear your perspective of specifically what is the assisted installer and what is the goal of the assisted installer?
Great. So I think that's a great question to start with. So basically, assisted installer is a layer on top of OpenShift install. It uses the same mechanism of OpenShift install to generate installation artifacts. It's just that it provides a kind of a nicer user experience and an end-to-end flow to make sure you're taking the right choices, and those are making sense from an installation perspective. So making sure that we are increasing the success rates of the installation due to elements like validation and making sure that the installation can actually be deployed successfully from the get-go. And kind of saving all the little mistakes that can be done when using YAML-based formatting and such. So the layer of validation, an easier layer of customization. So say that you want just to tweak the host name or different CIDR or add an NTP or provide static IPs for the configuration. We're just making sure that you can simply change that aspect and not the entire end-to-end deployment configuration. In addition to that, it's really important for us to do the overall monitoring of the process, making sure that from the get-go, you've got a clear view of where do you stand with regards to the installation, and also like all the events and monitors that comes up, and to be able to see that your cluster actually deployed successfully. So not just from an installation perspective, also that the cluster version operators, which are the core fundamental operators to run the OpenShift platform, are up and running, and all the needed configuration that you've put in is applicable. So that was one of the main aspects. So usability and the success percentage ratio to increase that. In addition to that, we were mostly focused to begin with on bare metal. And this is where it was important for us to kind of reduce the minimal requirements for installing a cluster. So if, for example, for any OpenShift deployment, you need a Bootstrap node, an additional Bootstrap node on the side to do all the installation manifest generation, it was really important for us to encapsulate that within the nodes that are targeted for the installation. So you don't need an additional compute resource that with bare metal cases, it is very precious one to include. Yeah, so I think that covers most of the reasoning to be able to provide an installation experience that is also applicable for a persona which is not a cube admin type of YAML-based persona, but more for the traditional IT persona that is comfortable with GUI and RESTful API to perform the installation process.
Yeah. So there's a number of things I want to unpack there. So first, there's a ton of great questions here in the chat.
Yeah,
Starting with
starting to defer here.
Yeah. So starting with Sun Zero. Yes, we are real. We are live streaming.
Live,
so you are absolutely. Please ask questions as they occur to you. So I am going to. I want to show kicking off and installing a single node OpenShift cluster, and because that'll take probably 25 to 30 minutes, I want to go ahead and get that started now, and then we'll address those questions. So just kind of real quickly here, you can click the create cluster button. There's also this assisted installer clusters. So I'll just show the create cluster. And then if we switch over to data center, up here at the top, we have assisted installer. We'll hit create cluster. So I don't have any clusters, right? So there's none that show up in the list here. So we'll just go ahead and create a new cluster. I'm going to very creatively name this Snow, single node OpenShift.
Wow, so creative.
Hey, you know, I may have marketing in my title, but that doesn't mean that I am.
Doesn't mean you're good at it. What?
So my internal network name, domain name is work.lan. I do want to install assisted or a single node OpenShift. So as far as I know, this is the only way to install single node OpenShift today. It is also by far the easiest. I think you can do it with the regular installer, but it's not as easy. I'll put it that way.
API-based installation, which requires an Arcos Live generation. It's similar to any other UPI installation, long and tedious. So I agree, that would be the easiest way to try it out.
So I do see that this was updated. This is now an RC3, so that's good. So OpenShift 4.8 is the only option with single node. Otherwise, you would have the option of 4.6 and 4.7. So we'll go with that. I hit next. So this next phase is mostly the same for all of the install options of whether I chose to do single node or a regular node. Let me close that so that way it's a little bigger. So what we want to do is generate a discovery ISO. And what this is going to do is effectively, it will create a CoreOS boot media that can then be attached to the machine, and it will then boot up, and then it will reach out, and we'll see it pop into the interface here. Let's see.
Have you seen this new option, Andrew, by the way?
I have not. I was just now noticing that.
Yeah.
So you've got, we have added the option to basically generate an entire ISO like we did in the past, which is more fitted to a USB drive installation method. But we also introduced a new way of installing, which including a minimal ISO that includes only the init RD to be consumed for the service. So it reduces the download from 900 megabytes to something like 100. So it's much faster to download. Okay. And we are actually serving the ISO via HTTPS. So the machine comes up and it reaches out to the service, and the ISO is being served from there via HTTPS. It is more fitted into virtual media, which is more sensitive to those type of flows, but you can work with it and try it out now as well.
Yeah, I'll test it out just to see.
Let's give it a whirl.
So very quickly, just posted my public key in here. I don't need a cluster to access the outside world. If I did, you can put that directly in here.
A proxy, you mean? Yeah.
Yep. Proxy config. So proxy host, username, password, all of that. And then I'm going to download the ISO. So I do like this, that it gives you the URLs here directly to download. And I think
super handy. That's what I usually use.
And Mohan, you mentioned that there's an API for this. So I've seen some folks use Ansible, and I'd have to dig up. It's scattered all over GitHub. Like Ansible playbooks to use the API to generate the new cluster and assisted installer, to pull down the ISO, to then attach it to virtual machines or whatever it happens to be, all in an entirely automated fashion. So
yeah, like one thing to remind everyone, API is there. Like that's the way that the UI talks to the service. So using the same API mechanism, it's just important for us to know that the tooling is not fully supported yet, meaning that the API is not also fully supported yet. We are working towards that, but that's the one thing to to make sure that everyone understands. In addition to the Ansible playbooks you were mentioning, there is also a CLI-based tool for Assisted Installer that has been written on Python, which is very useful. People find it very useful as well. Again, kind of an open source development on top of the API. So yeah, those are the options available to interact with the service.
Let's see why it's not allowing me to. It won't allow me to upload the ISO. Oh, VMware. Why are you?
Really?
Oh, certificates the browser doesn't trust. Okay.
Well, that'll do it.
Can I accept you now? Trust. Always trust, always trust. Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Could it be because I need to go to the host? There we go. That's why. If you didn't know, if Chrome throws that issue, you can type where it doesn't allow you to say, yeah, you can type, this is unsafe, and it'll move on past it.
Mm-hmm.
So let me go ahead and do that with both of my nodes here. Oops, come on. There it goes. So advanced, this is unsafe, all lowercase, no spaces. And we'll do the same thing with our certificate.
Here's a question for you, Mohan, while we're waiting here. Can we install can we use the assisted installer to install via IPv6 yet?
So IPv6 is a capability added to, no, it's a capability that we've added to Assisted Installer core to basically address some of the on-prem disconnected type of deployment. I would say that on the service side, it's less relevant. So since we don't have the mechanism yet on cloud.reddit.com to provide support for IPv6 routing as well on the Quake side. So that's mostly the limitation when starting to address IPv6 in a connected environment. For the disconnected option, if we get to that, to talk about the ACM integration, we do support IPv6.
Okay, cool.
So all I'm doing here, you saw I uploaded the ISO.
Yep.
I attached it to the VM. I told it to boot. It is now booting. And after it goes through this process, it's downloading, as Mohan said, it is downloading the root FS image here from mirror.openshift.com. So instead of that initial ISO download of 900 megabytes, it was an initial ISO download of, it was 90 something, I think, 100-ish. And now it downloads just the parts that it needs here.
Exactly.
So another question. Well, it's downloading all the things. Matthew Bach asks, let's say we don't want to host DNS because all we have are 3 OCP nodes. What can you do in that regard? Like, can you somehow answer this question of, like, would you use a managed DNS product at that point? Or what would you say to somebody that was like, I really just want the cluster, I don't want to host the DNS? Yeah.
So in the context of, let's take, for example, single node OpenShift as well as the regular cluster deployment, the DNS for the installation portion is already embedded within the cluster installation. So we are adding a service called Core DNS that handles the cluster's DNS name resolution, and that works perfectly on single node OpenShift as well as on regular clusters. So like in this example, for instance, for the internal routing within the cluster, you don't need any DNS service. Obviously, if you want external access to the cluster, this is something that you need to resolve either via a kind of static routing, etc. host type of manipulation. You need to take care of the outside communication going into the cluster somehow if you don't have like a general DNS service running.
And to be clear, I'm not doing that inside of my lab. I've already I created DNS entries in my lab for these nodes.
So using the installer disconnected, like we're getting asked a few times now, I think, about disconnected installs. How would you go about doing that, Milan?
So one thing that we are looking at it from two perspectives. One is, how do I install multiple clusters when I already have a Kubernetes essence? And this is where the ACM integration work that we've done between assisted and ACM coming into play. This is going to be a dev preview in the ACM 2.3 release, which is coming soon. That's kind of addressing the multi-cluster installation from an actual Kubernetes essence that I already have. The one gap that we got left to basically proceed with is the cluster zero installation. Like, I've got nothing, I don't have any Kubernetes. Now I need to install some, like the first cluster, and how do I do that? So one thing that we are trying to articulate and work towards now is the OpenShift appliance, we call it, or OpenShift install appliance, which will be this type of similar experience. I download some ISO, I boot it up, and I get a UI and an API to do cluster deployment. This is on our roadmap, and something that we're going to continue to explore towards 4.10, and we need to see how that is progressing, but definitely we've got the understanding that this is currently an area that we haven't addressed yet, and we are planning to do that.
Cool. All right. Good to know it's on the roadmap. Go ahead, Andrew. Sorry.
Yeah, real quickly, I'm just going to cover this so we can kick off the install. So I'll actually go back. So we have this option, install OpenShift virtualization. If this was a traditional full cluster, we'd also have the option to install OpenShift container storage or OpenShift data foundation. So directly from inside of here, I can choose to install those different features of OpenShift, including the configuration option. So I know it'll look for the disks and stuff like that with OCS. So we're not going to do that. You can see it detects the node. It gives us some details about that node, including I can come here and say, edit host. So if I want to do something like change the host name that it's using.
You can also change the installation disk. I'm not sure if you've seen that option already. Like, it's also
I have.
Came
after, because I use local storage on my nodes, so sometimes I do have to say like install here.
Yeah, I have seen it. I just don't have it on this one because it's only got one disk that's available. So if we hit next here, it detected the subnet that it's on, and it asked me which one it wanted to use. So essentially, this is the equivalent of in the install config.yaml, the networking.machinenetwork.cider. If I do need to change things inside of here, right, I want to customize the cluster network or the service network. And aside from that, that's it, right? Here's the summary, everything that I'm going to be doing, or that it's going to be doing. And we hit the button, and now we just wait. So there's a couple of interesting things that I think are available here. So first and foremost is view cluster events, right? It'll tell me what's going on. It gets that feed of logs coming out. So this is essentially the same as when you're running OpenShift install, wait for, Bootstrap complete, etc. Another interesting thing to note here, this is single node OpenShift. So it is all one node, both Bootstrap and control plane and worker node. And there's some magic that happens in the background to flip from Bootstrap to, control plane / worker. But with a regular cluster deployment, whether it's compact 3-node or 5+ node, it doesn't need a dedicated Bootstrap node, which is something that I think is awesome. Basically, it's smart enough to say, I'm just going to choose one of these nodes. I think it usually uses a control plane node, if I'm not mistaken. And it says, I'm going to use you as the Bootstrap node, and I'm going to bootstrap the cluster and then just turn that node into whatever it's supposed to be at the end of it, which is really cool.
Really cool. Question in chat here, which I think is interesting. If I did this as a connected install and then disconnected it and put it in a standalone environment, would it come back online gracefully?
Yeah, that should be.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That should be the procedure. You can make it disconnected. Obviously, you would lose the ability to update it or upgrade it.
Yeah, you'd have to have a function for that, but yes.
So that brings up a couple of interesting questions for me. So one, I haven't we haven't talked about this yet, but I wanted to point out that the OpenShift installer, the assisted installer, and that ISO that it hands us for the nodes, it does a little bit extra, right? In particular, like if I declare that it's, this is a control plane node, it'll do things like it'll do an FIO on the storage to see if it meets the requirements that have been declared in the OpenShift to the KCS, right? There's a number of checks that it'll run to basically say, hey, there's a good chance of succeeding or something's not right here. So I think that's really cool. But the question that I had was, when Catherine was on the show, she was saying that essentially at the end of the day, after you deploy an IPI or UPI or bare metal cluster, there's very little difference between them, right? Doing a non-integrated, not bare metal, a non-integrated cluster versus IPI, UPI, you don't have the cloud provider, but otherwise they're effectively the same. Is that true with assisted installer as well?
Yeah, the output, the cluster output that you get is should be the same as you get with bare metal IPI. So today with SNO, we are basically deploying it as a non-platform because it doesn't really need the cluster or machine API because it's a single node to begin with. So we are kind of saving all the extra memory and compute when it comes to a integrated load balancer or HA proxy and so on, as well as the machine API. So we are deploying it with platform none. We are adding some manipulation to that, but it's effectively the same thing as you get with regular IPI or UPI install.
Got it. So it's using it doesn't count as a load balancer when there's only one node because there's nothing to load balance. But so effectively that API endpoint, that start.apps endpoint, they're just coming into the standards. It's HA proxy with the ingress controller that's used by OpenShift, right?
With single node, we are using the machine interface to do that, since we don't need the HA proxy and those type of configuration. I think it would also be valuable to talk a bit about OpenShift, single node OpenShift, and why did we come up with that deployment option. So originally we kind of targeted it towards edge and production edge, telco 5G type of deployments. It was really important for us with seeing the market opportunity on the edge side getting bigger, that we have an OpenShift that doesn't have a dependency on a centralized control plane. So we had in the past the option to deploy a remote worker node. Now, this remote worker node has a dependency on what we call a supervisor cluster which manages the workload scheduling and such. Many organizations came to us and basically said, we need this type of workload autonomy. We need this type of cluster to be independent and not dependent on any other cluster, specifically in rural areas, and put it on a submarine or put it on a ship. We need this type of independence. And this is why we came up with a single node OpenShift. So first of all, it's the dependency aspect. Another aspect is to provide a consistent application platform from data center to the edge. So basically keeping OpenShift as much as OpenShift as we can on a single node. So we came up with the slogan, it works like OpenShift, it works like OpenShift on a single node. Because if you think about it, like from a scheduling perspective, you don't really actually need Kubernetes kind of advanced scheduling system on a single node. But what really matters to our customers is to have this type of consistent application platform. So a developer that develops software in the data center can push it all the way to the edge using the same tooling, same operational model. And this is where we see lots of value on the consistency of the platform behavior. And the main thing is that it fits within the constraints of a physical footprint of a single server. So the ability to start bringing OpenShift to areas that it couldn't live before. So whether it's retail store or this type of type of edge deployment, where every physical box matters. So those were the main reasons. And for that also, as Andrew was saying, we have been invested in what we call Bootstrap in place for this deployment option. So specifically for edge deployment, it was really important for us not to kind of eliminating the need to provide additional compute resources next to the target that you want to deploy. This is where we came with Bootstrap in place. It's a mechanism that allows you to generate all the installation manifests that happening during Bootstrap process on the live Arcos ISO, which is running. Now, the tricky thing was there that we are kind of saving all the meaningful artifacts that we need for later installation on the machine hard drive. Well, we keep all the things that we don't need on the live ISO. And this is where when we pivot this machine to start from the original disk, we've got all the artifacts ready, and we just need to put the right ignition, and the machine is coming up. And this is what,
sorry, coincidentally, that's the phase that we're in right now with our single node install.
Yeah.
Perfectly timed. Yeah. So go ahead. So right now the machine is actually rebooting and igniting with the target ignition to start the cluster, to start the initialization phase of the cluster. So like it is still in rebooting and probably would be there in a couple of minutes while doing all the generation and initialization. Yeah. Exactly, and then it will come up and starting to act like a regular cluster.
Yeah. So there's a few questions that I wanted to. Hopefully, we'll be able to get the cluster up and running, and we can show it. But with 13 minutes left, it's borderline. Yeah. So I can show. I've been using single node OpenShift for the last few shows. So if you've seen me show a cluster, it's probably been snow in the last few weeks. So we can always a link to that to see an example. But as you would expect, it's OpenShift, just with only one machine. So a couple of questions here. So is static IP assignment supported with Assisted Installer, or is DHCP required?
So currently the default is DHCP. Static IP allocation is there on the API level. We are going to build that as part of the roadmap plan, is to build the support for static IP allocation as well. It is actually there in the API level. It is using NM state format to define the different interfaces. So it's a roadmap item, and it is coming hopefully soon enough.
Very cool. Yeah. I do love me some NM state.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, I know it does take some getting used to, right? Expressing your network configuration as YAML, and desired state through NMCLI or the network manager.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does take a little bit of getting used to, but I find it to be pretty convenient. And it's used in a couple of different places in Red Hat. So for example, Red Hat Virtualization uses it. Can we deploy using, or does it require, and I can't see I'm just remembering this one. I'm not finding it in the chat does it require the disk to be blank or empty, or can you use an already used disk and it will wipe the disk for you?
You can use already used disk and it will wipe the disk for you. One aspect that we are not covering yet on that regard is when we integrate it with CNV, and therefore we're going to use the extra disk for LSO. This is where we don't do the cleanup yet, but that's kind of an additional improvement that we want to put to incorporate also LSO under the same experience, local storage operator.
Okay, and just to explain the acronyms there. So CNV is Container Native Virtualization, which is the old name and the name still used by the engineering folks for OpenShift virtualization. And LSO, local storage operator, as you said, is what allows you to consume local disks for whatever you need to use them for on an OpenShift node. So, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that with OpenShift Virts through the Assisted Installer, it was using LSO. That's interesting.
I didn't realize that either, but yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. It's basically using the same mechanism for OCS, for OpenShift Container Storage. So OpenShift Container Storage needs LSO at the underlying infrastructure to plumb the hard drives to the Kubernetes level, and this is where OCS gets on top. So we kind of use the same mechanism to do it with CNV and LSO, since CNV usually needs kind of persistent storage and preferably a block device. So this is where we found LSO to be very efficient and can provide a kind of a minimal needs, not shared storage, right? But at least the minimal requirements to operate with CNV.
I see, and I just responded to Krager here in the chat.
Craig.
Okay.
Craig works here at Red Hat now.
Oh, okay. I for some reason that username makes me think of Craggle from the Lego movie.
Oh,
I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyways, so I don't know if we asked the question that he asked way up here at the top about whether or not anybody is working with introducing or supporting OKD, and support I think is a loose term here, but whether or not OKD will work with Assisted Installer at any point.
I think there were some conversations around that in the past. We haven't got into the state of actually moving it forward, but might be an interesting topic to explore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm in the Kubernetes Slack, so I see a lot of questions about OKD that are happening in there. So yeah. I know the community is interested in that. I don't know, and I assume that you and the engineering team are probably focused on just getting to GA with OpenShift, never mind OKD at this point. So was there, I'm trying to look back up in chat here.
I think you got them. Started installation for one node. Yes, you can do that. Can you use it with only 3 masters? Yes, we answered that.
Yeah, one thing to note about so resource requirements. So the minimum for single node OpenShift right now is 8 CPUs and 32 gigs of memory, which is what I have allocated here.
Right.
If you're doing a compact cluster or a 3-node cluster where it's 3 control plane nodes that are also workers, the minimum is effectively the combination of the minimums for control plane and worker nodes. So control plane is 4 CPUs, 16 gigabytes of RAM. Worker node is 2 CPUs and 8 gigabytes of RAM. So combined, it's 6 CPUs and 24 gigs of RAM. The other thing to be aware of is, and we've talked about this a number of times here on the stream, storage. Make sure you allocate enough storage. I think I gave this one, yeah, you can see 260 gigabytes-ish.
Yeah.
So make sure you allocate enough storage for it to be able to pull all of the images that it needs and everything that will be necessary. And I think it was the OpenStack installation docs. I suppose I could look here. So at one point, the OpenStack docs
had a good
no, well, good was relative. It said something. What it had was like the minimum was 25 gigabytes or something. Which yes, it will install, but it won't run for very long because it'll quickly run out of capacity. It'll run out of disk, and then the nodes will go offline, and that's not good. So generally, the minimum is 120 gigabytes of disk for any one worker type or one node role plane worker node. If you're combining roles, I tend to use 200 gigabytes for a compact cluster, and you can see 240 plus for a single node cluster. Oh, look, it installed just like that.
Hey, it's done. Maybe.
So
initialization time.
Yeah. So let's see where we're at. And view cluster events. So it's in the finalizing process.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is download this kubeconfig file, and behind the scenes, I'm going to move that over to my Bastion host. And then we can hopefully connect over to it.
Cool.
All right.
This is your 5-minute warning.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Let me share this window.
Woohoo.
view share, iTerm, go. Hopefully you're seeing a lovely iTerm window now.
Yes.
All right, so inside of my directory here, I thought I had, oh no, I didn't. It helps if I put the colon afterwards, otherwise it just renames it to that. You wouldn't believe the number of times I do that to myself. So we now have this kube config no ingress. So if I do a export
capital, there you go. Just do $sign. Oh, that works.
Yeah, I can't talk and type at the same time.
Yeah,
so I just have to, yeah. And now if I do an OC get node, it works. We've got our one cluster node here. I can do an OC get route -a. Oh, it's still initializing. So oops, OC get CO. Yeah, so we can see our OC get CO is a bit of a mess here as it's finishing up the install. So, but everything will eventually come up over time.
Yeah,
like I said, 13 minutes is pushing it a little bit, especially because I'm scraping by with the bare minimum requirements here. So it'll take it a little extra time. But the point is, yeah, it works. It does
works, and it works very well. And Juan, thank you for that.
Yeah, I love, and sometimes I'll give demos of like OpenShift things, and Peter Lauterbach is great because he sometimes calls me out because I tend to say this is not meant to be an exciting demo, right? This isn't meant to be a big flashy thing, right? It's just it works exactly as you want it to, exactly as you expect. It's not surprising. It's not alarming when it works the way that it's supposed to. So I feel like something like single node OpenShift falls into that category. It deploys a cluster to one node. It's really cool, and I'm really happy we can do that, but it shouldn't be exciting. It should be predictable because that's what we want, especially as you were saying on edge deployments. It could be thousands of miles away. You don't want to have to, call somebody to figure out like, hey, can you go out and figure out what happened here?
Right.
You want it to be predictable.
Yeah, and more than that, to be honest with you, we kind of track the success rate of the installation, and we see kind of a higher success rate when doing it with single node OpenShift. It's simpler. How do you deploy it, and the engineering efforts around bringing up a cluster from a single node is much easier than 3 nodes. So we definitely see a good success rate with those type of deployments.
Yeah, you can see I definitely jumped the gun trying to connect to the cluster. So while Kubernetes is up and running, not all of the OpenShift components are. We can see it's still working towards.
Got a question here though. Can you use the assisted installer to add a node long after a cluster's deployment?
So we actually had this feature for a long time now, and you can do it from the OCM view. When you go to OCM and click on the cluster that has been registered back to OCM, you should be able to add a node to that cluster. In this specific case, is SNO
because it's single node. Yeah.
Exactly. So probably not an option there, but for any other cluster that you're doing, you can click on the cluster not from the assisted installer view, but from the OCM view, which, by the way, we've integrated the assisted installer views into that as well. And you should be able to add a node from that part.
Oh, that's really cool. I hadn't realized that all of this was in here. So it's showing me, so if you saw, I switched from the installation view. So if I go if I were to click create cluster and then go back, I would be able to see my single node OpenShift here. But this is the regular OCM view, as you pointed out, and I can get details in here.
Yeah. Lots of work has been done on integrating those portions, and on the multi-node cluster, you would also have the option to add an host, and for that you generate a new ISO to bring up your new host to the cluster, and yeah, should be working.
Very cool. All right. Well, we are, for better or for worse, out of time for today. So thank you, Moan. Really, really appreciate you coming on. I know you're just coming back off of PTO, so
thank you very much.
out of the off of the beach maybe and into the frying pan, so to speak, whatever it happens to be. So really appreciate you accommodating. I know you took some time while you were away to coordinate all of this, so thank you so much. To our audience, thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, if we didn't answer anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach me at andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. You can also reach me on Twitter. It's Practical Andrew, all one word, just like you've seen me in the chat here on the streams.
Nice.
So please don't hesitate to reach out at any time with any of those questions. Happy to follow up and get all of those answered. And keep an eye out for the blog post to come out hopefully Friday morning. If not, it'll come out in the following days.
And now we will switch over to the OpenShift Commons briefing about DevSecOps. So hang on tight, folks. Thank you, Mohan. Appreciate it.
Guys, bye-bye.